Andrea threw the papers onto the dining room table with a smile that made no attempt to conceal her contempt. "It's done, Rodrigo. I want a divorce," she said without hesitation. For 8 years, our marriage had been a farce of social classes. She, coming from a family that had always looked down on my modest maintenance job, felt she was finally free of a burden. She looked me in the eye and burst out laughing. "I hope you don't try to fight for the house. With your starvation wages, you could barely maintain the garden." I didn't reply. I simply nodded as she left the room with 3 suitcases already packed, convinced she was leaving me penniless. That same night, after silence had settled over the house she considered insignificant, I called Roberto, my trusted lawyer of more than a decade. Roberto wasn't a public defender. He was one of the best specialists in wealth law in the country. "Does your wife know about your real assets?" he asked me in his usual professional tone. "She hasn't the slightest idea," I replied. For years, while Andrea spent her salary on ostentatious luxuries, I had invested every penny I inherited and earned in real estate, stocks, and mutual funds. I kept a low profile not out of stinginess, but because of a life lesson I learned from my grandfather: money shouts, but wealth whispers. The following days were a constant barrage of condescending messages from Andrea. She told me that Fernando, her new friend and lawyer, valued our house at $200,000. She demanded 60% of everything, arguing that she had wasted her best years with me. Each message ended with a sneer about my financial standing. Even her mother, Marta, called me in a syrupy, fake voice to offer some motherly advice. "Be reasonable, Rodrigo. Give her what she asks for, and avoid legal problems you can't afford. You don't have much to lose anyway." Listening to them was like watching a movie where the villain celebrates his victory before the hero reveals his true identity. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived. The family court was filled with that suffocating tension typical of contentious separations. Andrea arrived dressed as if she were going to a gala, accompanied by Fernando, who gave me a weak handshake and a pitying look. The judge, a stern-faced man, asked both parties to present their sworn statements of assets. Fernando spoke first, arrogantly stating that Andrea was requesting the house, a vehicle, and alimony based on the supposed precariousness of my income. "My client has maintained a lifestyle that Mr. Rodrigo will hardly be able to sustain on his own," he concluded with an air of self-importance. Then it was Roberto's turn. He stood up with a calmness that made Andrea shift uncomfortably in her seat. "Your Honor, my client wishes to submit an amendment to the statement of assets," he began. Roberto unfurled a series of documents on the bench: bank deposit certificates, deeds to 3 commercial buildings in the city center, and the statement of accounts for a diversified investment portfolio. A profound silence fell over the courtroom. The judge reviewed the papers, raised an eyebrow, and looked at Andrea, who had gone pale, her mouth slightly open. "What is this?" Andrea stammered, looking at her lawyer. Fernando, losing all his arrogance, began frantically reviewing the documents. The net worth Roberto had just revealed wasn't a few $1,000s, but several million. The judge read aloud: total estimated assets of $12 million. Marta, who was sitting in the front row of the courtroom, dropped her purse to the floor. Andrea's face went from pale to bright red, not from embarrassment, but from a mixture of fury and a greed she could no longer conceal. "You've been deceiving me," she shouted, forgetting we were in front of a judge. "That money is ours." Roberto, without losing his composure, pointed out a crucial detail. "Your Honor, most of these assets were acquired through a premarital inheritance and reinvestments of my own capital, protected by the agreements Andrea signed without reading them carefully 8 years ago." Andrea tried to argue that I had manipulated her, but the records were clear. I hadn't stolen anything. I simply hadn't flaunted my wealth. Her disdain for my maintenance work, which was actually managing my own service companies, had blinded her to the truth. As I left the courtroom, Andrea tried to stop me in the hallway. "Rodrigo, we can talk about this. We don't have to be so drastic," she said, her voice trying to regain its gentleness. It was too late. The woman who had laughed in my face days before was now begging for a piece of what she had always despised. I looked at her with the same calm with which I had faced her insults. "Andrea, you wanted a divorce because you thought I wasn't good enough for you. Now that you know my worth in numbers, suddenly I'm the man of your dreams. But a person's value isn't in their bank account. something you never understood. The process ended with a fair division of marital assets, which for Andrea was a complete defeat compared to what she had hoped for. She kept the $200,000 house, but lost the man who would have always taken care of her, regardless of money. In the end, the silence I maintained for years wasn't just a financial strategy, but the shield that allowed me to see who loved me for who I am and who wanted me for what I had. I walked to my car, not a luxury sports car, but the same old vehicle, feeling for the first time in 8 years that the air was lighter. True wealth, I discovered, is the freedom of not having to prove anything to anyone.